Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Python Community News, the show where we talk about all the non-pip installable news happening around the Python community. I am one of your hosts, Jay Miller, and
I'm Jon Banafato.
we're still trying to figure out the intro, and we will get there. But John, how you doing this week?
I'm doing pretty well. How about you, Jay?
Pretty good, pretty good. We've got equal amounts of news, but I think there's a lot of thoughts that we want to share this week regarding kind of just Twitter Spaces, modern conferences, and kind of a lot of follow up to what we talked about last week and how virtual conferences are can become a more valuable proposition.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what's first on the docket here? I think we have on that virtual conference note, we have an interesting couple of things to share about one conference in particular.
Yeah, so first up, we have DjangoCon. One of my favorite local conferences, it being literally down the road from you. I'm so happy about this. DjangoCon actually announced that they are going to be doing weekly Twitter Spaces with virtual only tickets. And they also announced or sorry, I said virtual only tickets. They're doing weekly Twitter Spaces up until the conference starts. But in the first Twitter space, they announced a few things. John, let's cover the first one about their mask and COVID policy.
Yeah, so this is something that I'm personally super happy to see. So DjangoCon has an official COVID policy on their website at 2022.djangocon.us/COVID. And this includes two things that are particularly notable, which are vaccine verification and a mask mandate. So if you want to see all the details, go to that URL, check out the page. But a big thing that I've been seeing a lot of is right events go back without these policies in place, and then a week later you see hashtag conference COVID, right? And personally, I think DjangoCon's taking more precautions here than I've seen a lot of other events take, and I'm really interested to see how this goes for that conference, and hopefully how it influences other conferences to continue to kind of raise the bar on that front.
Yeah, that it is interesting because the 2022, or I guess the 2022 conference season has been my busiest conference season. For those that don't know, my job is to interact with the community, and a part of that is attending some of these events. And I've seen many different ways that people have handled COVID. In this case, what Django is doing is very similar to what PyCon announced as well, with using the Share My Health app. So people have to share their vaccination status prior to entering the conference. Masks will be available on site. Of course, you're always encouraged to bring your own as long as they're KN95 approved or equivalent. And and there's also kind of a good enforcement policy. And I think that's kind of been the big question that, John, you and I have had just in conversation of a COVID policy is only as good as it's enforced. And I think at least I've been to conferences where there was one, and if you would never know. I think knowing some of the organizers and being able to talk with some of the organizers, I'm excited to know that they're taking a lot of things into mind, including safety, and the health and safety of the attendees that are there.
And so, in addition to that, there are also so for context here. This is DjangoCon's first conference back in person, right, since 2019, correct?
Yeah, and they actually took a year off in 2020, I believe, just to kind of get a feel of what virtual conferences would look like. So I think they've spent a lot of time studying and kind of have a good idea of what they want to accomplish here.
And so last year they had a an online only conference, which was fantastic. I attended it. There were a ton of great talks, a lot of activity in their community spaces through chat and whatnot. And so the other aspect of right this world of how conferences are continuing to operate is they have virtual talks or uh, pre-recorded talks, I guess.
Yeah, virtual only. Like that's the thing that got me. And actually, when I heard about this, I reached out to one of the organizers from Jeff Triplett, who's a DEFNA founder and former president of the Django Events Foundation of North America. And he says it best. He's like, the online only talks are just extra content to fill the gaps. The gaps that you would normally fill with the hallway track. And I get that. I think that that's one of the things that conferences that are virtual only have to balance. Usually, when you have an in-person conference, for those that haven't been to one before, an in-person conference, you have to space out the time between talks if it's a multi-track event because you have people going from one place to another. And in this case, you have the like a virtual talk, you don't have that. So it's like, oh, 15 minutes of nothing in between a talk. Yeah, that's kind of rough. That's rough for people to engage in, and especially when you're at home, maybe the conference is on in the background, or maybe like you're doing that and you're trying to do something else, and you're like, oh, well, I'll get up real quick and go do this other thing, and then all of a sudden you've kind of forgotten that there's a conference happening.
Yeah, I think that's a thing that is has always been challenging is right scheduling time between talks. When you're going to right in-person events in smaller spaces for uh, you know I, I've run events in spaces where right the doors to the conference speaker rooms are basically right next to each other. But I've also attended events where you have to walk a half mile right through the conference center in order to actually get to your next talk. So finding the right balance there is always pretty difficult, and I think this is going to be a really interesting um, experiment as far as letting people fill that time, especially when you've got um, when you've got attendees, right? In person who are filling that time with hang out in the hallway or actually traveling between two talks, and other folks who are maybe just still right at the desk on their couch, wherever it may be.
Yeah. And I think I think the actual, well, one of the online talks falls like kind of in that lunch break. So obviously, when you're on site somewhere and you're grabbing lunch, if there's food provided, you're eating food, you got to, do all those things. If you're sitting at home, maybe you grab a sandwich, maybe Postmate something or order out, and then, you're eating it. So I feel like the ability to just kind of eat your food and be done. Yeah, there is a looming kind of pause there of like, well, I'm done eating, and there's still like 45 minutes before the next talk. That's not a good feeling, I guess, to have. So having a talk kind of fill that space makes a lot of sense. And we talked about this a little bit last week about kind of the idea of like the if the conference if you're there for just the talks, then like that's an interesting, concept for you, but also part of being there in person is more than that. I love that DjangoCon is trying to create more content, and I think this is only one of the things they're doing. They haven't announced everything yet, so there's going to be some interactive stuff for online attendees as well. They're really putting forth the effort to make the event worthwhile, whether you're in person or you're watching virtually.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned this already, but they're going to be talking more about what to expect at DjangoCon, on Twitter, and I'm sure all of this will end up on their website at djangocon.us as well. What do we have next on the list here for this week?
Really quick, because I'm having some intermittent connection issues that just popped up. Uh, do me a favor while we're doing that. This Twitter Space idea is very interesting to me. The idea of like let's interact with the community live and like do it on a weekly basis and kind of get a feel for what's happening. You've organized conferences before. Is this something that you see conferences doing? Is this a thing that conferences tend to not do for any particular reason, or like what? Like this seems new to me. Is this a new thing?
The Twitter space as a way to kind of gather feedback from your audience. Is that the
Yeah,
question?
or at least some type of online forum to get people's thoughts about an upcoming event.
Yeah. It's a good question. I think it's both new and not. Right. Twitter Spaces itself is relatively new. Right. I haven't used Twitter Spaces when running any in-person events because they didn't exist when I ran my last in-person event. But a lot of events that and you know here I'm going to speak specifically about more local events are going to be interacting with their community kind of throughout the whole planning process as well, right? So um, if you're running a tech conference, you may have kind of grown that out of an existing meetup or some other community, and the conference itself is getting kind of built throughout the year as you are already right interacting with your existing community. So you're talking with your meetup uh, attendees and speakers as as you're hosting your normal events, and some of that happens kind of in real time. That feedback. I think it probably has been more difficult in terms of right running events at a larger geographic scale for um, gathering that sort of pre-conference real-time feedback. Um, but I've certainly seen other events run things like surveys to to kind of gather the community's thoughts, both after the event, like how'd it go, what do you want to see next year? That is a super common question in a conference survey, but also um, hey, we're doing this thing, and we want your input in order to make it the best it can be. And but that said, this is the Twitter Space thing. I think is really interesting. I'm excited to see kind of how those evolve over time because it is more real time than any of those other methods that I have seen in the past.
Yeah, and it also gives people the ability to like kind of speak up. Whereas, like, a lot of, I mean, it feels more like a town hall type discussion other than I mean, even I've seen like other podcasts do live streams with like PSF organizers and reach out to them. And, even we're doing things like this with our own show, but like, this is great because if people want to give feedback, they can type it, but they can't necessarily, just jump in and start talking or say, "Hey, I have a question," or if the question is like, void of context, they can't provide that context. So, I think doing a Twitter space makes it very, very appealing for people to come in, especially when you're doing things like announcing a COVID policy and maybe you have, clarifying questions or things like that. People can actually join and take the virtual mic for a second and speak.
Yeah,
But you,
the clarifying questions are a big part of it
yeah,
too, right? Because I can sit down and write a document about a policy that's going to happen at an event, and no matter how much time I put into it, I'll miss something. I'll miss two things that someone might pick up on really quickly. And for a lot of other um, for a lot of events that I've been involved in, right? These are all. kind of built out in the open, right? So the website and other tooling around the conferences, community-run conferences are often open source and available for others to contribute and actively encourage that. So even when you're doing things in a more asynchronous way, people do have an opportunity to say, well, I noticed that something's missing here, so I'll file an issue, or I'll just suggest an edit to the page. But all that said, if you do have a question about a conference, right, ask the organizers, right? They're a lot of the time they don't hear about things until like way after the fact, and I've it's I'd be more happy to say I don't know the answer to that, but we'll get that policy nailed down and get that posted publicly, than I would to say, well, someone didn't come to an event because we didn't answer a question that was an oversight, right?
Yeah. And we also have someone in the chat that is a DjangoCon organizer, and they mentioned, trying to make the Twitter space as interactive as possible. The hope is to give folks, to have people ask questions so that they can answer them, and especially the questions that people didn't think about in like that planning stage. So it's like, oh yeah, we're going to tell you everything that we thought about, but there will probably be things that we didn't think about. So like if you ask them, we can go, that's a good question, or that's a good point. Speaking of good questions and good points, let's jump on to the next topic. But while we're loading that up, just a reminder that you can take this on the road with you. We actually have this as a podcast, and you can find it wherever podcast players or, whatever podcast player you use. We're in Apple, Google, Spotify, all the parties that use those libraries as well. Just check out Python Community News where podcasts can be found. But you mentioned surveys. Let's talk about the PSF. They are asking people to provide feedback on Python packaging. And this is interesting because I did this survey. And, Jon, do you do much with PyPA?
I am not involved in PyPA, no. But as a Python programmer, I use tools that they maintain, and I'm super impressed by the how that space has evolved over the years. And I don't have a ton to say about the survey other than go do the survey. But Jay, since you went through it, I would love to hear your thoughts.
So I'm torn a little bit because so for those that don't know, like when we talk about PyPA, we're talking about all the tools that revolve around taking Python code and making it available to other developers. So this is things like pip. I believe it's also includes things around like, I know poetry isn't like directly affiliated, but like they're probably involved in some ways, especially with like pyproject.toml files and things like that. And also things like pipenv, virtual environments, and all of these different things. The way that you manage your environment within the Python ecosystem, these are all the things that the PSF were asking about. And to be honest, a part of me was a little confused at times because I was like, well, wait a minute, are they asking me this from the perspective of someone who has, repos on PyPA, like on pip, Python package index, or like PyPy, I guess, or PyPI? Or are they talking about someone that uses PyPI or, pip install to grab things? Like, how am I taking this survey? And I felt like the answer kind of was just yes. That being said, I'm interested in why they're doing this, because ultimately one of the things that they mentioned at the end was we want to share some of this information and create a vision for Python packaging. And what kind of vision do you need, or like what am I missing in this, Jon?
I mean, I think it relates a lot to some of the things we talked about last week. In particular, one that Python is right one of, if not the most popular programming languages in the world. And two, PyPI. So this is the Python package index, which is the site you interact with when you run pip install, right? By default, they maintain PyPI and they introduce changes like support for two-factor authentication, and then a two-factor authentication requirement for certain right types of packages. Right. In last week's call, we talked about critical packages requiring 2FA, and so these were the top some percent of packages by I think it was by download.
Yeah.
And right, the idea here is these are the biggest areas of concern when you're talking about if a package were to become compromised. Here's how many people it would affect.
Yeah. The overall
And
footprint is massive.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so PyPA is I think largely a group of volunteers. And that build these things out and serve the whole Python community. Whether if you've ever installed any Python package, right? You've used a tool. You've used more than one tool maintained by PyPA, and right, this is a really good opportunity to kind of provide your feedback to help let the people who maintain it maintain all of those tools. Help let them know what you want to see out of the tools, and what your actual uh, problems involved in packaging and installing Python applications are.
Yeah, and when I think about like the things that could be done to improve these experiences, because I mean this is ultimately what they're asking for, is like, hey, are things good, are things better, should things be improved? Usually you don't ask these questions if you don't think that there's something that you could be doing. And when I think about what the Python Software Foundation has done in the last few years with bringing in a developer in residence with Lukash, with adding more and more, not just work groups, but like committees that focus on bringing, and like that's really what I feel like PyPA is. It's like a committee of developers, of volunteers, like you said. I think with some of the security things happening, I think what it has shown is that, and also with seeing some of the improvements that are going to be coming out in Python 3.11 with just performance and efficiency, I believe that there is kind of it worked with Python, maybe it could also work with PyPI. Like if we have a dedicated focus, if we have like funding going into having people dedicated to making this their full-time responsibility, we can address a lot of the issues that we might see internally that people don't see. And we might be trying to create kind of here's the list of things that we want to address first as sourced by the community.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, it isn't free to build out all of this infrastructure and these tools, right? It costs people's time, which is sometimes donated, um, but it also costs money to uh, to one kind of reserve that time, because not everyone can donate their time all the time uh, for open source work like this. But it also costs money on the front of things like infrastructure for hosting, right? And so PyPI has a bunch of sponsors, and you can there's a page that I'm sure we can pull up somewhere, that lists them out. But without those kinds of sponsorships, um, and in-kind sponsorships, I think people would be pretty shocked at the sticker price of just the hosting costs, not even including all of the um, all of the people behind it, and what their time is worth. And so, you know, in addition to going in and taking the survey, if you're in a position to, um, consider getting your companies to sponsor these things if you depend on them, because uh, I use PIP and PyPI a bunch of times every single day, right? And I think most people who work with Python would say the same.
We use pip to bring this content to you. Like there's I've had so much fun just working on like in the background of getting like automations and stuff built and like developing systems around getting the website up and like the newsletter and all that stuff. I do feel like one of the things that we can look at with this as well, and I'll throw it up on the screen, is the actual, sorry, wrong, there we go. There was a pep that was kind of presented in, and this was a few years ago, this was about 3 years ago, that they kind of established this. If you're interested in wondering what PyPA does and what their overall responsibilities are, this is a really great breakdown of those things. And I mean, I can't read them all now, but if you like reading all of this kind of stuff, and us talking about it is probably not the thing that you can handle and you'd rather just read it instead, you can actually read our newsletter that comes out every Monday. And as you can see, we give you all of the topics with some thoughts and opinions, and even upcoming CFPs and for the upcoming months, as well as some links to the video in the episode. That said, I talked about all the things that we install with pip and the project that we're doing. We actually have some contributors to our project, and I don't think that we're the only community or the only project looking for contributors. In fact, this popped up on Reddit earlier. We'll make this a little bit bigger for people to read. The package Starlite reached out on Reddit to look for contributors and maintainers. And obviously this is a thing. I don't see this very often. So I wanted to kind of bring attention to it, and again, kind of ask that same question that we asked with the Twitter Spaces of like, is this a thing that's going to become like the new normal of like, hey, I'm working on this project, I'm looking for contributors, r/Python is the place to go for that? Or is this something that's unique? And then also, I wanted to highlight this because of a statement that they made, where they say it's a core pillar of Starlite to have multiple maintainers and be open, inviting, and accessible for contributions as we can be. Jon, let's ask the first question of, is this the way to get people to contribute to your project?
That is quite a loaded question. There's no the way to get people to contribute to your project. It's a way to get people to contribute to your project, but I think a big part of it is meeting those people where they are, right? And if the people who use Starlite are active on Reddit, and there's a rich community around Starlite happening, in our Python, or other subreddits that are related to it, that's probably the best place to look for it. But I do tend to also see this happen pretty regularly on like a GitHub issues page. If a project is hosted on GitHub, right, you'll find an issue that's like a pinned issue that says looking for maintainers, and then details about what that involves, and an application process. Sometimes I'll see people post it in right on a README, but on top of that, you'll find it. sort of on a one-to-one uh, scale, right? People will say, "Hey, you know, I know you, and right, you've contributed to this project before. Can you dedicate more time? Can you help out become a maintainer?"
Let's talk a little bit about, I guess, maintaining anything. I mean, maintaining anything in the Python space. You obviously have experience in, I would say, maintaining a conference. You've been helping to run PyGotham for several years, and then uh, we also, like I said, we maintain a project and things like that. What are some of the challenges that maintainers focus, that they have to deal with when it comes to, and like that would lead them to doing something like this?
Do you mean why ask or why put up a call for maintainers? Is that it?
Yes, kind of yes, and like I understand, like there's always this concept of like, if I have more people looking at this, it can probably be better than what it is. But I also look at this from the perspective of, like, one, Starlight is an API framework. It's kind of in the same lane as like Fast API. It uses Starlet and Pydantic, which I believe Fast API also uses. This seems like, I'm trying to think of the way to say this without saying like Starlight's in trouble, because I don't think they are. But I feel like the messaging paints a picture. And when you go on Reddit and you say, "Hey, I have a project. It's fairly good. It's production ready, and I'm looking for maintainers." I don't know if that's a, "Hey, I'm bored with this project, so I want more people to kind of take ownership of it," or if it's, I'm just trying to, one, promote my product as well. So if people are maintaining it, they're probably using it as well. I know, like, that's, hey, guess what? We're using tools that I maintain because, I mean, I maintain them. Like, that's just the thing. So like it makes sense to me, but like I feel like there should be a place where people looking for maintainers go, and I don't know if Reddit is that place. I don't know if there's a place that the PSF has available to them. I don't know if there's a, if, I mean, their GitHub might even have something in general, but like putting it on Reddit feels weird for some reason, to me at least.
Yeah, so I think that I want to mention one resource uh, or one group that is relevant to a certain type of needing maintainers, and that is a GitHub organization called Jazzband.
Hmm.
So github.com/jazzband. We when maintaining the site for the newsletter and for this call, right, we use a couple of projects that are maintained by Jazzband, and this is where some projects have gone when, right, the original maintainers, right, either no longer have time or interest to continue maintaining something, but don't want to see it just kind of flounder, right? And so there are a whole bunch of projects listed under here. One that I use quite a bit is Pip Tools. But if you look through this list, yeah, there's a ton of them, and I think that, you know one, if you're right, if your choices are, um, shut a project down or reach out to Jazzband, or another group like it, the option that keeps the project, uh, maintained is the better one, in most cases. But there are also a ton of other reasons why someone might not want to uh, be, right, a sole maintainer of a project, right? So um, as projects grow, as conferences grow too, right? They adopt more processes. The maintenance burden becomes bigger and just needs more work put into it. And so even if nothing else is changing, but you have 10 times as many users of your project as you did previously. Um, Keeping up with those, those pull requests and issues might become, more work than you have the time or energy for. It also might just be, this thing is right bigger than I realized. Right, the PyPI team emailed me and said I have to enable two-factor authentication on my account because it's a critical project. And what do I do? It's a critical project. And so you've got a lot of different reasons why someone might someone might look to bring in new maintainers, even if they're not looking to step away or put in any less time. Because bringing on a new maintainer is also time consuming at the beginning in itself. But what about your projects? Right, we're using Render Engine
Mm-hmm.
to build out PythonCommunityNews.com, right? And uh, right now, I think you're the only maintainer of that. Is that correct?
Yeah. So even putting render engine out on PyPI was kind of a thing that like I had to do it for work basically. It I didn't picture myself maintaining a project, and I actually have two or three on PyPI. Most of them do not get much. I think Render Engine probably gets the most downloads, which is like I think like 100 a week, and I'm sure like 90 of those are me, doing something somewhere. But the in that moment, there have definitely been lulls in development, mostly because as a maintainer as a maintainer of a project that I made because I wanted it to exist in the world, which is why I think a lot of people make the packages that they do. You get to a point like not where it feels feature complete, but you feel like it's solving the problem that you have. And the only way that it can solve new problems is to have people bring those to your attention. But if we're being honest, like you and I had these conversations during the week, which by the way, if you want to participate in some of these conversations and how we're actually making Python community news happen on the tech side, there is the repo there. You can easily join github.com/kjymiller/Python community news with dashes. Uh, Even in that moment, you're asking about like post CSS processors, and I'm going to talk about that because Render Engine is a web app or a web static site generator. And in my mind, it was like this was just never a thing that I thought of. It was just, I mean, again, I think as Kojo mentioned in the chat, of like sometimes bringing more people in will help ask the questions that you didn't think to solve for. So I think for me, like, I don't know, I'm kind of torn. I don't necessarily want Render Engine to be much bigger because I don't know if I have the bandwidth to support it. So maybe that's kind of a maybe this is what's happening with Starlite is maybe they have some attention and they're like you said, maybe I need to provide some support. And also I remember clearly I was working on Render Engine when my daughter was born. And I mean, at that point, everything kind of stops. Like podcasting stops, videos stop, like everything just kind of comes to a halt while you're adjusting your life. So while I, well, like I said, I don't think that Starlight doing this and posting it on Reddit it's not like there must be bad news over at Starlight. I don't think that that's the case. To me, I've never maintained a project where asking someone to help with that project was a thing that I thought of. Not that I don't want the help, just it's never been that big of enough priority for anyone in the Python space or for me to want to do more. And I think I see that here with like this project. We're working on this project together. We're supplying code and we're doing things and we're playing to each other's strengths and each other's knowledge. And I see the benefit of that, and that kind of makes me want to go back to what they mentioned in the post, which was like their core pillar of having multiple maintainers and being open, inviting, and accessible. Accessibility is one of those things that is always hard when you're talking code, because I think that there's like code, like physical accessibility, like, are there things that are put in place that someone who has physical disabilities, that they would still be able to participate. But there are also like being inviting and like understandable for people of all experience levels. And I think I haven't seen many. I've seen projects like claim to be very accessible in those spaces, but I've seen very few actually, in my opinion, take that on with like that being a core philosophy. I see you're thinking now. Like,
I am thinking. It's it's one that requires someone to step back and look at their project kind of as an outsider, and to prioritize those things. And I think that until you do that, a lot of projects end up being just like you said earlier, like I need this thing, I'm going to build it, and I'm going to throw it up on PyPI so that I can install it where I need to.
yeah.
And right, um, it has a GitHub page, and there's one, maybe two contributors ever, right? And in some of those cases, I've made little contributions here and there, and people have been surprised that someone else is even using it. And in others, they've said, right, well, I'm not interested in this being a project for other people. I'm not accepting contributions. And so it's really a philosophy of, right, what you're looking to cultivate there, and building out, right, that sort of intentional structure to welcome new people to a project, I think is going to speak to the long-term health of that thing. And I can speak more on the events side of things here than I can on the the code side, but people are going to become they're going to gather around spaces that they're welcomed much more quickly than spaces where they're not, and that's going to apply to, right, a GitHub issue tracker as much as it is to, right, a conference or a meetup, etc. And I think we have a couple of comments in the chat here that are
Yeah,
interesting and relevant.
there's one here from Kojo. Again, it says it feels like if people are asking for new maintainers, they either want help or they're willing to help people become contributors, and the second is less common. And yes, absolutely agreed on that. One of the things that I wanted to even bring up here was I posted that like we have a total of 4 contributors to our repo, and when I shared it, I'll expand that a little bit, see if we can make it a little bit bigger. Brian Douglas, or B Dougie on the internet, who runs Open Space, which is a site that is dedicated to helping people contribute for the first time to projects, chimed in on it and said, of all repos on GitHub, only 0.1% have 5 or more contributors. So like, imagine the difference between like a lot of people out here doing it on their own, but also the amount, like Kojo mentioned, the amount of what goes in, and kind of like what you mentioned too, what goes into onboarding, contributors. And I know for us, I tell people like I tell people we cheated, but that's like the way to do it. Like you want to cheat in doing this, find issues that you know how to do that you can do that will only take a couple of minutes to do. Write down the steps on how to do it, put a good first issue tag onto it, and then encourage people to contribute to it because that gives them the ability to start to become familiar with your code base, and it puts it on their radar of, oh, this is a project that is open to having people contribute to these types of projects, and they're willing to help you go through the steps of doing so. And then I think the other side of that is also having the like a good contributing document. Hey, this is how you contribute to the code. This is something that we worked on. Like as we're like writing it, there's like this issue mix up, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, we need to add that as well. Like all of these documents need to be living and breathing as we go through all of these different things. Which, by the way, our amazing our guest via chat of the week, Kojo, actually is speaking about this at DjangoCon Europe, in contributing. Let me see if I can get that on the right screen here. Didn't DjangoCon Europe just? Yeah, no, it's happening later this month. Ah, yes. Here we go. Yeah, so improving contributor experience and broadening contributor scope. I love this idea as a concept. And you might be wondering like, okay, hey, we're a news show. Why are we talking about this? And ultimately the reason we're doing this is because the reason we're doing the show is like we want to bring insights to people in the community. That includes people who are on the fence about becoming an open source contributor, people who need help contributing things to the show, to not to the show, but to the Python community as a whole. And Jon, you mentioned, speaking more to the idea of events, like talk about some of the things that contributors to, and like, I guess, contributors and organizers like have to do to onboard new organizers for conferences.
Yeah. So, you know, conferences, especially as they're growing, need a lot of people involved in order to really continue to operate and to improve year after year. And so, right, a lot of that, if you're looking to get involved in volunteering or organizing at a conference, a lot of that starts with the little stuff, right? It's the stacking chairs. It's really really common kind of intro to conference volunteering is tasks like uh, session chairing and session running. So what this means is to right be that person that's holding up the time card that says 5 minutes left in your talk, and you sign up for your slot of a few hours of sitting in a room and keeping speakers to their allotted schedules, or if you're a session runner, you're signing up to make sure that the speakers get from the green room to their stage at the right time, right? And um, these are the sorts of things that are kind of funnels into getting even more involved in a conference organization, if that's something that someone is interested in doing, and a lot of that will happen kind of uh, as a natural part of volunteering, right? Like that, right? So if you show up and say, I want to help with session running, and you show up on time and you do that work and you look interested, somebody's probably going to say to you, great, if you're looking for additional responsibilities or to get more involved in this thing, one, we have another slot we need to fill tomorrow because we didn't get enough volunteers because we've never had enough volunteers. And two, this thing happens every year for the past 10, 15 years, and uh, it takes a lot of people to continue that uh, that process throughout what is likely longer than a full year planning cycle. Um, and so that's when a lot of the time you'll see uh, kind of like a direct ask to get more involved in organizing a conference, and that'll be things like attending monthly meetings about planning out the full thing leading up to the actual event. But you'll also see more behind the scenes stuff like um, putting out those general calls for organizers or for maintainers, like like the one we covered earlier today. So uh, a big part of it is finding the people who are interested in actually doing it, and that a lot of the time comes down to right a general call for volunteers saying, "Hey, we need people to do these like 1-2 hour shifts to help keep the conference running," and then documentation. There's never enough documentation, and this all speaks to kind of a healthy um, a healthy and long living organization, right, has the things in place in order to allow people to right move between responsibilities, onboard new people into responsibilities depending on their interests, and that's where a lot of it really comes down to, right? Like you're going to get um, a lot of the time with conference volunteers, you're going to get the most kind of engagement from people doing what they are really interested in. So if somebody's I've had people say to me, I want to run registration. I think it's a lot of fun. And other folks would be very surprised at that because you're checking in 500 people in a 30 to 60 minute time frame, and that's hectic. But uh, I've absolutely been like, cool, you want to run that, go for it, I'm here if you need me. And I've seen people put into place really efficient systems in order to keep that line moving, which is a hard thing for a conference, right? Day one, everybody's getting there and excited.
Yeah. And organizers are often like running around back and forth doing
Yeah.
things. Like as someone who's been like a sponsor or worked at like a sponsor booth, like organizers are working nonstop, moving around, and like yes, you forget to have someone just stand in the green room and make sure that the next speaker is of it. Like you know where they are. Like that I have seen that happen so many times before. And that's what I was going to mention is like when there is a lack of people volunteering, it's not only felt by the organizers because they're stressed out more, it's felt by the attendees as well because the conference feels disjointed in ways, or little things will happen where like speakers will go over time, and then all of a sudden now conference organizers are trying to like get people back on schedule and get things moving again, where like you said, as simple as having someone that just starts a stopwatch, and that when they have 5 minutes left, you're like 5 minutes left, you keep going. uh and
It's also
John,
a lot of fun. I'm gonna throw this out there. If you're listening to this and you're planning on attending a conference coming up, uh, consider volunteering because it's if you're going to session chair, you get a front row seat to all those talks that you were looking forward to see, or if you want to really interact with a lot of attendees, um, volunteering right at a registration desk, or a lot of the time a conference will have like a swag bag stuffing event, right, where you got to get all the different uh, trinkets and stuff into swag bags the day before the event so that they can be handed out quickly. um, it's a great way to get more involved in a community and to really kind of fill a role that you may not be aware of is pretty critical to the whole thing operating smoothly. So yeah, if you have a conference coming up that you're attending, and you want to help the organizers out a bit, definitely look at what volunteer options they have.
And speaking of conferences coming up, I think it is that part of the time or the show where we talk about some of the upcoming conferences that are happening. And you might be wondering, like, we're not going to cover every single conference every week, but we're going to try to bring new conferences to your attention each week, or ones that are coming up soon. And the first one that we have coming up is PyCon UK. PyCon UK is back in Cardiff. If you were in the UK and you can get out to Wales, by all means, go check it out. I know a few of the people speaking, and one of the talks I actually got to hear early. I learned a lot, and I'm really excited about it. But it's good to have a long running conference, PyCon UK, back in Cardiff on the 16th through the 18th of September. Jon, what about I promise I didn't set you up with like PyCon Poland, but I'll throw that one to you.
Yeah, PyCon Poland is coming up in a couple of months now. I guess 2 months away.
Yeah,
And they have a call for proposals that is active right now, I believe.
yes, yes, yes. This is the non-translated Polish version. There we go. Yes, they.
Yeah, so if you're interested in speaking at PyCon Poland, you have about a week at this point to get your talk proposals in. You can find all of the details at pl.pycon.org, and yeah, I would highly recommend getting those talk proposals in sooner rather than later, because I don't think I've ever seen a call for proposals end and no one says, "Oh, I missed the due date. I can't believe that I didn't realize which date it was." So
Yeah. And we're getting this was a narrow squeeze as the CFP ends anywhere on the earth today, I believe. So if you have a talk and it's ready, or you have a good idea for one, you can reach out. And they are providing. They're not providing travel, I believe, but they are providing your hotel stay. And then also to bring up one of my favorite conferences, which is Pyjamas, a great conference that is designed to be virtual. It is virtual, all virtual, and very, very low key. Often speakers are in their pajamas presenting, and their CFP is also open. The conference is available in November. But I wanted to bring this one up as well. And we have a board that you can use. We don't have a vanity URL for it, but I will do my best to make sure that there's one in the future. But you can actually see upcoming CFPs, if CFPs have closed, but the conference is coming soon. And we are working to even give this information back. And if you have a conference that you know about, we found out about PyCon Portugal just as we were wrapping things up and didn't have time to add everything, so we'll probably bring it up again in the next episode. But if you have a topic that you want to contribute, you can do so again on the GitHub page. Just file an issue and there will be a button there. I probably should have did the smart thing and just made it available for people to check out, but I guess that would be too easy. Let's see. Yeah, you go to issues, new issue, and you have a button there. You can add a conference, or you can add a news topic. If you have a topic that you want us to talk about, you can share that information with us, and we go through this. The cutoff is sometime on Thursday in the US. We haven't quite figured out. We're very much like a conference CFP. If you're a little bit late, maybe we'll squeeze it in. We can figure it out. But Jon, is there any other news that we have for this week?
I think that's all the news for this week. And if you're interested in hearing a compressed version of this, we're working on getting out a version that is just the news, just the facts about it, and it'll be similar to the content that goes out in the newsletter, but it'll be in podcast form. So if highly encourage you to come hang out with us for an hour on Fridays, and we'll be doing these every week. But if you want that kind of very very short form version of it, stay tuned for a new weekly brief version of all the things you heard about today.
Yep. And again, you can find that Python community news everywhere that podcasts can be found. And if you can't find us on that one, let me know and we'll get it added. But I think that's going to wrap it up for this week. Again, I've been Jay Miller.
I've been Jon Banafato.
And this has been the weekly Python community news.